The Electronic Frontier Foundation is an organization that exists and has existed since 1990 to try to assure to humanity the right to know. I mean, which is a right that hasn't been previously promulgated because it was an impossibility. But our dream is that anybody anywhere may have access to anything that human beings do with their minds one day, because that capacity is being given us by the internet, and that can change everything. And we just think, the human mind has its limitations, but we just think that humans are more likely to achieve their ultimate purpose, whatever that may be, if they have the capacity to completely explore the possibility space of what can be known.
The human nature that I came across from the early web developers, it was very open, very giving, people very much working together, encouraging each other, very much full of excitement, getting a kick out of making things work, and very much out of making things work together. I think the collaborative spirit of it was a driver for most of the people, even though they worked by themselves sometimes, because the nearest sort of web enthusiast may have been hundreds of miles away. They were connected up over the network, and I think the fact that they were connected up through email lists initially, and of course the early websites, I think was a very important part of it. With data, it's the same thing. People are saying, well, there's not a huge amount of data out there, but the bit that's out there is really neat, and if there was lots out there, it would be great. So I'm going to put my bit out there.
One of the reasons people are drawn to virtual communities like Second Life is people are hungry for community. They're hungry for meaning in a society that is oriented around the production and consumption of consumer goods. Buy more stuff. I mean, it doesn't make people happy. I know this sounds like a gross oversimplification, and in some ways it is. But when there's an alternative to be able to reach out and to find kindred spirits who have common interests or share a common perspective on life and to feel fulfilled by that, people will do that, even if it is a somewhat low resolution version of reality. And I would call a virtual world like a very low res version of real reality.
The internet is a new one of these, and it has particular strengths as well as some weaknesses. And the strength is that it lets us do this thing that we've always done to one degree or another, but now do it on a much larger scale, which is to think together, which is what conversation is usually about. Well, now we can do it with a much broader range of people across a much more diverse territory and a much larger geography.
A lot of things that were private just because it wasn't practical to share them. And so it was strange to share them, so it may be strange to say to the world, hey, I'm having lunch at this place, because I would have never done that before, but that doesn't mean I care or that it needs to be private. And so people are understanding that in big numbers, and as Biz says, it's been a process. It's been happening. When blogging started, which we were involved in 10 years ago, it was this crazy notion. First of all, why would you have the audacity to think anyone would care what you read? and secondly, why are not all blogs are private by any means, are personal information, but even like writing these sort of a journal online is like blasphemy. It's like, why would you? And now that's a much more accepted idea that people would share parts of their lives, and I think it'll become just obvious.
From time to time, just have inspirational stories. You have political candidates leveraging the system. You have, people just capturing moments, be it, a local event happening within their town, or, protests, or what's happened in Iran. People capturing these moments and having now a chance to share them with the world, and people using it as a resource to be informed. And what I think it does, when you see the personal side of people just capturing everyday life, is that it breaks down cultural barriers. in the past, I think people have just kind of consumed their knowledge, or I guess their perception of the world, just through media, which again isn't always unbiased. But when you start seeing everyday life from everyday people on the streets, no matter what country they live in, I think it adds a very personal element to that people can connect with, and they start understanding that they have families, they have feelings, they have dreams, just like I do. Well, we wouldn't exist if people weren't creating content. I mean, that's the bottom line. I always tell people we're the stage. They're the performers. But I don't look at us as a service as trying to exploit that. What we're trying to do is just provide the opportunities that didn't exist before, free opportunities for them to do so. If they don't want to post to YouTube, or if they have existing content they want to take down, they're always free to do so. We're not trying to control them or their content or their experience, but we're ultimately always just trying to give them access to the platform to cost effectively distribute their content and get in front of a global audience that wasn't, I guess, aggregated before.
When you look at the fact that you can be sitting in your pajamas on your couch and help drive, world peace, that is actually happening today. That's possible in a way that it was never possible before. And I think that that's something that is incredibly important. So, does it mean that people have shorter attention spans? Yes, but is that a bad thing? Maybe, depending on what your point of view is. But in terms of what it can actually enable socially, economically, and politically, I think that we should embrace and welcome social technology, not fear it. One of our Ning networks is the Congo Wall, which was created by Eve Ensler, who had just gotten back from the Congo with her V-Day organization, where women are being brutalized as a means of fighting a war. And the fact of the matter is they feel alone. And with social technology, women from all over the world could come to this Ning network and leave a message for the women of the Congo. You're not alone. And those messages, over 2,000 women and men around the world actually contributed a message. They printed them out and took them to the hospital in the Congo where women were recovering. No one is alone anymore.
The question of anonymity on the web is a pretty interesting one. If you spend any time in political discussions or any kind of lifestyle discussion on the web, forums and postings and so on, you could see that the conversation typically degenerates to a very uncivil level quickly, particularly when and as the people who are posting are anonymous. You don't know who they really are. They lack accountability. People feel free to say whatever they want, and that's one downside to anonymity.
One way in which you'll give up personal information is obviously by clicking on one thing or another that reveals the sorts of things you're interested in. But how would they get from that to actually figuring out, for instance, who you are? Well, it's well known in the privacy world that things like your birth date, your gender, and your postal code or zip code will allow people to figure out who you actually are, what your true name is. Now, how might a website get that information from you? Well, let's say you want to sign up for a horoscope. Then you're going to give them your birth date and probably tell them whether or not you're a man or a woman. Then maybe you want to find out what your local weather is. Probably the easiest way to do that is to put in your postal code or zip code. And bingo, they've got 3 pieces of information that are going to make it really easy for them to figure out exactly who you are. But the information is coming to them almost for free. That is, your clickstream data just comes to the website, comes to advertisers without your actually having to do anything other than just going and clicking on things. So it's a very, very cheap and unobtrusive form of currency. I mean, probably the best thing about it is that it is so unobtrusive. You don't know you're giving it up, and so it seems entirely free to you. And then the consequences of it, maybe you get certain kinds of ads, maybe you get telephone solicitations, but you have no way of knowing that that's because you clicked on 17 things on these 5 websites, and so whatever it is that you're paying for it, you don't really make a connection to the information you're giving up.
The fact of the matter is that we've already long ago given up much of our privacy as soon as we started to email and use mobile telephones. But if you thought about what it would be like if your neighbours knew details of your bank account or your medical record, or could listen into your quarrels with your spouse, you would be very disconcerted, because you would feel that you were losing control over areas of your life that just belong to you. That's why privacy really matters. And the great worry that we have in the digital age is that we've already given so much of it up, both to private agencies and to public ones. We should be very worried, I think, about the amount of data concerning ourselves, including very personal, private, intimate data about ourselves, which is now out there in the public domain, both in private and in public hands. We should be worried about it for a large number of reasons, but one central reason is that this information is stored digitally in one or another location out there in a way that we may not have access to ourselves. And it's very, very easily manipulated. It's very easily changed by somebody who is either lazy, incompetent, or malevolent in some way. It's very easy for that information to be shared, and for patterns of information to seem to appear to certain agencies that could put one under suspicion, even if one weren't a suspicious individual. In other words, the prospect for misinformation, for corruption of our personal information, and for mistakes to be made about our personal information is massively increased by the fact that there is so much of it out there and so much of it is collated by different agencies. Inefficiency and patchiness of information is a great protection of personal privacy. And the more efficient the systems are that collect and collate data about us, the more the potential is for mistaken misuse.
Protections for anonymous speech are pretty solidly entrenched in First Amendment law. And in a way, the ability to speak and be heard separate from your identity is important, especially in extreme political cases, especially where there could be repercussions to free speech. The ability to speak in a way where who you are is not known is valuable. I would even say precious sometimes. So there's a kind of a balancing act of social interest that I will frankly say different countries draw the line in different places, and I don't think one size necessarily fits all. There are a variety of threats to privacy online. The worst case scenario would be when information about a person is collected by a large, powerful institution, whether public or private, whether government or corporate, in a way that is used profoundly to their disadvantage, and where the individual has no control over the usage of that information.
Well, I think this generation has a sense that information wants to be free and information about themselves wants to be free. And in a way, there's a kind of self-surveillance that I think that young people don't think about in political terms. But it is a political issue. People put their lives on the screen. They put really intimate details of their lives out there, and with very little thought that there might be people using that information in ways that are not benign. You know, I don't know where to take my daughter to teach her that. When we go through the Mass Pike and there's Easy Pass, my car is tracked, there's surveillance cameras all over. We're both giving up unprecedented amounts of information in profiling. I think that it's hard to teach the relationship between privacy and democracy, and it's also hard to teach the relationship between intimacy and privacy. What is intimacy without privacy? He wants to have a private conversation. He goes to payphones, and he feels that payphones are the only safe place for him to talk. You have this sense of even young people looking for the interstices of the system to find a little privacy.
Regardless of whether you think, social technology and the internet is good or bad, it is. And it's the choice of people and the people who are using it as to what they want to do with it. It is the most empowering generational shift that has ever happened.